Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News America. Today is Monday, September 15th, 2025. We're going to be looking at the 2025 elections in America, specifically the ones that are happening in November. We're going to be looking at the Virginia and New Jersey gubernatorial elections, the main things we're looking at for November. Election Time News, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian politics. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, Threads, Instagram, and X. On all of those, we give you the most accurate and up-to-date and fast-coming news and information on anything as it comes out that is politics related. So make sure to follow to get a single source for all non-partisan, unbiased news for elections as it comes out. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So now onto the video. We do have the map here. Now, the reason that California is there is because of the recall election against Gavin Newsom, and she beat by 23 and 3/4 points. But what we're mainly looking at is Virginia and New Jersey, which we both will have coming up in 2025. Republicans will have 26 held seats and Democrats 22. Currently, Republicans hold Virginia, Democrats New Jersey. So, the general gist behind all of it is that we have two of each party here. We have one Republican seat, one Democratic seat that are up, and the main thing behind that is that the general consensus comes down to, I'm trying to find the pages for the other results that happened previously, but I'm not finding anything quite yet. 2021. So we're looking at here is that first off, there was a potential general, I'm not necessarily sure, I can't find the, it's not really showing up here. So what we have is a race in New Jersey versus a race in Georgia, and so that's going to be the main thing. Here we go. He is actually the first Democratic governor reelected since 1977. That was Phil Murphy against the nominee Jack Ciattarelli, who was nominated again. And so we saw a pretty narrow margin here. It was only 3.2%, which was relatively poor, especially considering how well he did just 4 years prior. But now we're going to be breaking down into how New Jersey's actually looking a bit more competitive than Virginia. Not by much, though, as Virginia has become a bit more competitive. Meanwhile, New Jersey has not, so they're somewhat almost on the exact same level at this point. And you can see here that Glenn Youngkin had somewhat of a surprise election here, where he did end up winning by 1.9% against previous Governor Terry McAuliffe. Now, he is not able to run again because in the Virginia Constitution, governors cannot have consecutive terms. There is no term limit, but they cannot serve consecutive terms. So we're looking at for the New Jersey race is currently right now 8.3 is for race to the White House. This is the one that really has any forecasting here. But on the ETN thing, we actually have 9.1%. Now, this is a relatively strong margin, and this is mostly due to some poor approval ratings. This is mostly how this is a good portion of how Youngkin was able to win in Virginia, was based off of these poor approval ratings for Biden in Virginia, right, even just a bit after the election. So minus 11, even amongst 2024 voters, it is still minus 11. That's 1-1, right about in the middle. Most of the other ones, they're a bit more approving of him in all the states that he won. And they are less approving in some of the states that he lost, including Vermont and DC as well, being some of them. So in Virginia, it is actually minus 11 for both of them. But what we're looking at is basically the Virginia electorate was about like D plus three or so. And so the concern about that is we're seeing even, or New Jersey, what we're looking at here. And so there it's minus 14.6, and in general it's minus 22. So that was a relatively poor electorate for 2024. It was very close in general, and so Kamala Harris won the state by quite a bit less than would have been expected, only by 6 points, only a tenth of a percent more than she won Virginia by. And that was after a 10.1 and 15.9 point margins in 2020. Instead, this time they were right next to each other, and actually won both by less than New Mexico. And meanwhile, the previous cycle, Joe Biden won New Mexico by 10.8, Virginia by 10.1, and New Jersey was more than Colorado. So this is the first time in a while that Colorado has voted to the left of New Jersey. As you can see, going back a while, it was a swing state in 2016, and then before that, Obama won both by quite a considerable amount. And before that, Colorado actually went red for quite a bit of the time. 1992 was the last time that Colorado voted to the left of New Jersey. And so before that, both of them were actually relatively Republican states. And so this actually did vote to the left. Here, 28 and 20, it voted to the right. Here, 24 and 13, it voted to the right. So even back when it was relatively, they were both relatively somewhat Republican, it still did vote to the right of New Jersey a considerable amount of the time. So with very few exceptions, it has, generally speaking, voted to the right of New Jersey. So that's interesting to show how New Jersey, and generally this area over here, has really moved to the right. You actually had Passaic County flip, which even voted for Clinton by 22.5 points. And then Biden only won it by 16.5. It moved to the right from 2016 to 2020. Very few counties actually did that, mostly being all in this area, with the exception of Bergen County, all the counties in the general New York City region. And if we look at the exact same thing in New York State itself, that's also what happened here. Is Trump did up to 10 points better in some of these regions. Now, Biden did considerably better in the entirety of upstate New York, which is how he improved by 1 percentage point on Hillary Clinton's margin. But all down here, he did considerably worse in a lot of the central New York City region. And so that is how that ended up being considerably closer than than it potentially could have been. So that's a potential concern there. But and of course, New York, Harris did 10.1% worse, or 10.5% worse, and 10.1% worse in New Jersey. So that's a potential, another reason why it could potentially be relatively concerning for Democrats here. Jack Ciattarelli obviously already came in with full statewide recognition, but of course, uh, the opponent in the race here, being Mikey Sherrill, is no-namer by any means. She has been in the House for a while. She held the 11th district and is in the 11th district right now. She won re-election in 2024 by 14 and three-quarter points. And that includes some of Passaic County, which has shifted very hard to the right recently. And so she won by 18.8 in 2022. She won by 6.6 in 2020. And she flipped the district in 2018, winning by 14.5 points. So that's actually I believe, a bit of a shift and it got rid of the margin. That's annoying. It's a bit of a shift to the right, if I'm correct, from those 2 years, but it is still somewhat of a strong performance. And then she got a little bit of a bluer district. You can see some of this redder region did get moved into this area, and she got a little more concentrated in the inner urban regions. But she did win by 14.5 points in 2024. Relatively strong candidate. She's known amongst a good bit up in the northern section there, so that may help her. But Jack Ciattarelli is obviously a relatively strong candidate in his own right. But we do still have the benefit of the fact that even with all of that, Cheryl's winning by 8.8 in the RCP. average here. Qantas Insights plus 10. You can look here. Rutgers Eagleton margin did drop by a lot, but that's mostly undecideds. But even then, she's been considerably strongly ahead, and you can see Citarelli is actually basically holding on to barely 38% of the vote, which would be even less than he got last time. He got 48. That's a 10-point loss. That would be, but 46.8 to 38. That's not anything close to the full electorate. There's going to be definitely some undecideds here. I didn't go as in depth as I eventually did for the Virginia one. We'll get into that in a minute, but that's going to be the main thing to look at there. And if we look at the favorability ratings, though, current incumbent Governor Chris Murphy has a plus 19 approval rating, so that's not going to be harming her by any means. So based on that, we actually do have a 9.1 point margin. It has been slowly shrinking, but that is the general expected margin there in New Jersey. 9.1 being a likely margin. This would be a continuing pattern. With the exception of 2021, New Jersey has gone to the opposite party of the one that is in the White House each and every cycle going back decades. So if you can see here, red, and there red as well, blue, red, going back except since 1984, which is when Ronald Reagan was in the White House and a Republican won the governorship. And then you go to 1989, that was Bush Senior and a Democrat won the governorship, and then you had it flip for Clinton, and then Clinton won re-election. Bush Jr. Bush won re-election. Obama won re-election. Trump, Biden essentially broke that. So that will likely end up actually going to the Democrats. This county map is closer than it had been. There's some movement up here. Passaic County getting closer. Some of these southern counties starting to flip. And getting stronger for Citarelli as this margin is slightly narrowing, but there's expected to still be some relatively strong support for Cheryl, especially in her own district. There might be a bit extra of name recognition in this county up here. I forget exactly what the county's called though. Morris County. Morris County did vote for Joe Biden by 4.3%, but that was on a 16-point margin. So if we would look at the margin that ended up uh, going by compared to the state as a whole, that is about 8, 9, 10 points to the right, somewhere around like 12 points to the right, so that'd be about 3 points Republican. So it might end up being a bit closer than that, but it's not necessarily entirely sure as of yet. So with that, we end up having that margin for New Jersey. Next, we go into the state of Virginia, where we're going to have the somewhat closer map as well. Some of these counties have flipped, shifted, have some regions over here. Just try to get region tooltips on here. I believe that's Lynchburg. Yep, Lynchburg got a bit closer. Montgomery County over here got closer as well. Virginia Beach is much closer. This is a swing area over here with the 2nd district is going to be interesting to watch in the state of Virginia. So all of that is going to be somewhat competitive to watch. If we look at the race here, though, Spanberger is expected to win by 9.7, according to Race to the White House. It is a bit Democratic leaning, though. But if we look at the margin, 6.2%. Now, this is one they looked at. Coefficients poll ended 2 weeks ago. And what we're looking at here is that, in general, if we look all the way up at the top, you can see the top line result with the overall number here. If we look, where's the governor's ballot? There's lieutenant governor, attorney general, House of Delegates, federal job cuts. So there's a lot of interesting things. There's a few loaded questions for the support. But what we have is, in general, the top line was the top line result here was 48-43, Spanberger plus 5, which is essentially the lowest number that we've had for a while. Roanoke College went from 17 to 7, but that's with a good bit less undecideds. Both candidates gained percentages, so undecideds obviously have gone up, and that was 3 months after their last poll. And if they do another one in another 3 months, that would be right at the beginning of November. If we look at I think that VCU went from +10 to +12, so that's actually an increase. You have no other polls really had any specific comparables, unfortunately. But looking at the trend line from pollster to pollster really does help, as you can cancel out, as they typically, if they are slightly errored in how they do sampling and such, you can compare it to themselves because they probably continually do the same thing. If you look at coefficient here, +5 is the top line, but if you look at the self-reported party, 37 to 40, that is an R+3 electorate, which is not what we saw in 2024. It was about D+4 or so. And so with that, you can see, obviously, you can tell that it's not going to be, even in a 2024 scenario, which was very bad for the Democrats, that would be a relatively strong candidate showing. Now, something interesting is even on the election day ballot, Donald Trump actually won the election day polling, the election day ballots in Virginia. But based on the absentee ballot provisionals, post-election ballots, which is basically everything that got mailed in that came in after election day, which is about 50,000 ballots. And then the early voting, which Harris only won by 140,000 votes, she ended up winning by a relatively impressive amount. So you can see that even in that case, it's not going to be an R+3 ballot on the end of the day. If you look at the general lower turnout elections, like midterms especially, Democrats do very, very strongly, especially because they're increasingly doing well with college educated voters, which are more high propensity voters. So if anything, we're probably going to see a bit better of a performance than these polls would suggest. So D+5 is probably lowballing it a bit. If you weigh it a bit more towards the actual ballot here, which is going to be relatively easy because if you look at the split of Republicans versus Democrats for their opinion, it's basically 1-to-1. If you look at Virginia party control, most of them actually, the majority actually think that it should be bipartisan, which I think is pretty interesting. Earl Sears basically completely along party lines, and there's the governor ballot. Governor ballot is basically 1-to-1 right there, 48-43, but basically 1-to-1 if you look at Democrats and Republicans, basically 90% each. So it'd be pretty easy to just do some quick math there, but it'd be relatively close and be maybe like 4.3 or so instead of it'd be like 5.3 instead of 5. It's not going to be anything ridiculously increased, but there's still 7% undecided, so that's going to be interesting, especially amongst independents. But independents are breaking almost over 2-to-1 for Spanberger. So if that actually does end up showing up on election day, that would be a blowout for Spanberger by every means. But that guess is going to be 5.8, which means that this is going to be another likely race. This is going to be a flip, though. And so that's going to be the final result in Virginia being a 5.8 point margin for the Democrat, flipping that seat in Virginia, keeping things somewhat close. That's going to be less than Northam won by in 2017. Northam won by 8.9%. So that would be a bit less than that, which is after the last time that Trump entered office, obviously. Murphy won by 14.1. That would also be another lower margin in New Jersey. But both of them would be won by Democrats, which would be good news for them after their pretty abysmal performance in the 2024 generals. So thank you all so much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe, follow everywhere, and thank you all so much, and have a fantastic rest of your day.